My mother-in-law laughed her head off while handing me my allowance of $50 and humiliating me. But her laughter was cut short the moment she saw the contents of the brown envelope I handed her. A home should be the most comfortable place in the world to rest, but that theory vanished as soon as I saw the shoes scattered around the entryway as if an impromptu assembly had been held there, and I had just returned from work. My body felt ground down after a full day dealing with the endless problems at the restaurant. Just as I was about to insert the key, the door swung wide open, and an intense smell of expensive prosciutto and aged cheese hit my nose. It smelled wonderful, yes, but the problem was that I had not bought any prosciutto, and my wallet started trembling with fear, imagining who had done it. The scene in the living room tested my faith and my patience. There they were, sitting as calmly as could be. My mother-in-law, Martha, and my sister-in-law, Rachel. Meanwhile, my husband, James, was sucking the grease off his fingers from the prosciutto as if it were the last meal on the face of the earth. The three of them were sitting with their feet up on the glass table that I had just cleaned that very morning. Breadcrumbs and food scraps were scattered all over my favorite shag rug, creating a new and exasperating abstract pattern. There was no warm welcome, no polite questions like, "Have you eaten already?" or "Are you tired after working all day?" The only thing I received was Martha's piercing stare, as if I were a debt collector arriving at the worst possible moment. James did not even bother to get up to help me with my heavy laptop bag. He simply glanced sideways and went back to burying himself in his cell phone, perhaps replying to hate comments on social media or simply watching funny cat videos. I do not know. My husband had an extraordinary talent for acting like a decorative statue in his own house. If there were a contest for sitting still while playing on a phone, I am sure James would be the national champion. Rachel, my sister-in-law, with her airs of grandeur but a wallet like a broke college student at the end of the month, only snorted when she saw me arrive. It seemed my presence in my own home was interrupting their private picnic. I had barely rested my rear end on the sofa when Martha's shrill voice filled the room. Without preamble, without introduction, she pointed directly at my face with her grease-stained index finger. She said that starting this month, the rules of the game in this house had to change completely. According to her, I was a spendthrift and did not know how to manage money. And this was despite the fact that I was the one covering all the expenses, from the electricity and water to James's high-speed fiber optic internet, so he could continue existing in the virtual world. Martha's logic often exceeded the limits of human reason. Perhaps she lived in another dimension where the person who worked the hardest was precisely the one to be blamed. Martha straightened her back, preparing to issue her royal decree with a face of fake seriousness. She said that the salary I earned every month was too much for a woman like me to handle. In her opinion, that much money could make a wife become rebellious against her husband. And this was even though James had never complained about money as long as his stomach was full and he had tobacco available. But of course, James limited himself to nodding like a bobblehead dog on a dashboard, approving anything that came out of his mother's mouth. For James, his mother was the law, and I was just a walking ATM that coincidentally slept in this house. The next sentence that came out of Martha's mouth made my blood boil all the way to the top of my head. She said, "Give me your paycheck. I will manage it. For you, $50 for feminine products is plenty." She said it lightly, as if $50 were an incredibly generous amount to survive a month in New York. And then she let out a loud laugh, a laugh that sounded incredibly satisfied and contemptuous. Rachel joined in with giggles at her side, clapping her hands as if it were the funniest joke of the century. Even James, my own husband, gave me a mocking smile. $50 for a month, they said. Perhaps Martha thought I was a houseplant that only needed tap water and morning sunlight to live. And on top of that, she mentioned the feminine products, as if my needs as a woman were my only important expense. It seemed her dignity as a mother-in-law had been mortgaged for a greed without remedy. And to think that the mortgage on this house, The gas for the car, the monthly groceries, even the money for the little fixes that Martha secretly asked James for? Whose money was all of that if not mine? But well, greedy people usually suffer from sudden amnesia when it comes to the origin of money. Strangely, instead of exploding with rage or starting to cry like in a soap opera, I felt incredibly calm. My mind suddenly cooled down, as cold as the ice in a neighborhood bar. I looked at them one by one, recording their faces of victory in my memory. Martha's face, shiny from the ham grease. Rachel's face, full of envy. And James's face, impassive and without remorse. They believed my silence was due to fear or that I had resigned myself to my fate of being a slave in my own home. They did not know that in my head I was planning the most spectacular farewell party for them. Slowly, I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. I stood up straight and fixed my work clothes, which were a little wrinkled. A slight smile formed on my lips, a smile that made Rachel frown, confused. "Ah, so that is it, Martha? You want to handle my entire paycheck?" I asked with a tone of voice so soft, even smoother than silk. Martha nodded vigorously, her eyes shining at the imagination of the mountain of money she was going to control. Surely she already had a long shopping list in her head, from gold jewelry to a new dress for the next wedding, just to show off to the neighbors. Without saying more, I headed to the master bedroom. My steps were light as the burden I would soon take off my shoulders. I opened the closet and took out a thick brown envelope that I had prepared a week ago. This envelope had been waiting for the perfect moment to come to light, and it seemed that destiny had served it to me on a silver platter through Martha's poisonous mouth. I weighed the envelope for a moment, feeling its thickness. It was not just an envelope, it was my ticket to freedom. I returned to the living room, where those three human beings were still looking at me expectantly, waiting for the tribute they believed they were going to receive. The atmosphere in the living room suddenly became silent, like during a final exam when the proctor walks in. The eyes of all three were fixed on the object I held firmly in my right hand. That brown envelope looked thick and tempting, as if screaming to be opened. Martha even swallowed hard. Her Adam's apple bobbed up and down with a rather comical rhythm. Probably in her head, this envelope contained bundles of bills, the annual bonus, or the profits from the restaurant they had always coveted. What they did not know was that the thickness of the envelope did not come from purple bills, but from a stack of their own sins and stupidities that I had documented meticulously. I placed the envelope on the glass table, right in the middle of the cheese rinds and scattered prosciutto scraps. My movements were slow and calculated, deliberately stretching the moment to enjoy their expectant faces a little longer. "This is what you asked for, Martha," I said dryly. "You said you wanted to take control of the finances, right? Go ahead. There are all the assets and responsibilities of this house." I had barely withdrawn my hand when Martha lunged at the envelope with the speed of lightning. Incredible, the energy some elderly people have when it comes to money. Her reflexes could surpass those of an elite athlete. Rachel and James stuck to Martha immediately, like ants that have just smelled spilled sugar. Their heads bumped as they competed for the most strategic position to see the contents of the magic envelope. "Wow, it is so thick, Mom. I bet there are thousands of dollars in here," Rachel whispered with a voice that was hardly a whisper. James just smiled from ear to ear, his eyes squinting. Perhaps he was already imagining buying the latest video game or inviting his friends for some beers to appear like a successful man. Poor illusions, destined to fly high only to crash without a parachute into the abyss of reality. With a rough and impatient gesture, Martha broke the seal of the envelope. The sound of tearing paper resonated loudly in the silent room. She turned the envelope upside down and dumped its contents onto the table. But in that instant, time seemed to stop for the three of them. Instead of purple and blue bills falling like a rain of prosperity, what came out was a stack of white papers with official, rigid letterheads. The wide smile on James's face vanished instantly, replaced by an expression of confusion, like someone who has walked into the wrong public restroom. Martha wrinkled her already wrinkled brow. Her hand trembled as she picked up the first sheet. She squinted, trying to decipher the bold letters without her reading glasses. Div, divorce. Petition, Martha stammered. Her voice got stuck in her throat as if a fish bone were caught in it. Her face, which before was overflowing with joy, suddenly turned pale, whiter than an unpainted wall. She looked at me in horror, as if I had just transformed into a ghost. Before Martha could recover from the shock, James frantically grabbed another paper from the table. It was a copy of the deed to the house. There, written in black and white, was the name of the sole owner, Emily, along with a purchase date well before our marriage, complete with notarized proof that it was a separate asset that could not be touched. James's eyes went wide as saucers, with his mouth so open that even a fly would hesitate to enter. He had just realized that the palace where he had been lazing around all this time was not his, not even a penny of it. His dream of keeping the house if we divorced had vanished in a matter of seconds. Meanwhile, Rachel held the last sheet with a trembling hand. It was a detailed summary of the online gambling debts and loan shark loans in James's name, the interest on which I had been paying in secret. The sum was astronomical, enough to give anyone a heart attack. Below the breakdown there was a sworn statement that read, "I cease to be his guarantor and to pay his installments from this very moment." Rachel looked at her brother with disbelief and then at me with panic. She realized that if I stopped paying, the debt collectors who would come would not be as polite as wedding guests. "Why so quiet? Weren't you the ones laughing the loudest a moment ago?" I asked, leaning back calmly on the sofa. I looked at them one by one with an icy gaze. "You said I only needed $50 for feminine products. Well, now you calculate it yourselves. Without my money, without my house, and with that mountain of debt from James, do you think $50 will be enough for the three of you to live for a week?" The room went absolutely silent. Even their breathing sounded heavy. The arrogance that filled the air had evaporated, replaced by the stench of fear and a belated regret. They had just realized they had dug their own grave. If there were a neighborhood statue contest, the three before me would have swept all the trophies. They were paralyzed, mouths slightly open, like goldfish without oxygen in a tank. Martha's face, previously defiant, was now livid. The thick makeup seemed to crack under her expression of excessive shock. James, who usually acted like a rooster, now seemed shrunken. His shoulders dropped sharply as if someone had suddenly removed his spine. It was a sight that delighted my eyes, much more beautiful than any sunset on the beach. Finally, it was Martha who was the first to snap out of her frozen state. She threw the house deed onto the table roughly. Her breathing was agitated, like a bull facing a red cape. "Are you crazy, Emily?" she shouted with a broken voice. "What kind of wife are you to dare ask your husband for a divorce? Remember, James is your husband. Your duty is to obey him. This house is also his. Do not be so greedy." Martha's logic was truly amazing. She forgot that a wife's duty does not include putting up with a gambling addict husband who allows his mother to squeeze her dry. I just smiled sideways, looking at Martha with feigned pity. "Did you read it wrong, or are you pretending not to understand?" I asked calmly, pointing to the deed with my chin. "My name is very clear there. The purchase date is 3 years before I married your son. So legally, James does not have the right to a single tile of this house. Unless he wants to count the dust on the windows, he can take that with him," Martha stammered. Her eyes moved frantically looking for another excuse, but her mouth remained shut, defeated. Seeing his mother cornered, James tried to take control of the situation with his usual tactic, pleading. He got up from the sofa, his pale face now forced into a pitiful expression that disgusted me. He tried to take my hand, but I took a step back instantly as if his hand carried a deadly virus. "Honey, don't be like this. he said with a softened voice that sounded like a cat trapped in a door. "The salary thing was just a joke from my mother. We only wanted to test your patience. You are not going to ask for a divorce over a joke, are you? Let's talk about this calmly, please." I let out a dry chuckle, with no trace of humor. "A joke, you say, James?" I asked, staring straight into his eyes. "Was the gambling debt of $5,000 also a joke? Are the bills from the loan shark with interests that are drowning you also a joke? I have been quiet all this time, James. I paid it in secret to protect your reputation. And what has been your response? Asking me to live on $50 a month." I shook my head. "I am sorry, James. The charity is closed. If you want to test someone's patience, do it on the street, not in my house." Rachel, who had remained silent, holding the paper with the breakdown of her brother's debts, spoke suddenly with a trembling voice. "But Emily, if you divorce James, who will pay the rest of the debt? And where are my mother and I going to live?" That innocent question, born from the fear of poverty, sounded incredibly selfish. She did not care that my marriage was breaking. The only thing that worried her was who her new cash cow would be. "Well, I don't know, Rachel. That is no longer my business," I replied indifferently, shrugging my shoulders. "James is the man, the head of the family. Surely he can find a way to earn money. Or maybe you can help your brother. You say your handbags and shoes are very expensive, right? Try selling them. You will get something to pay the interest for a week." Rachel's face turned red as a tomato. I do not know if out of shame or rage at seeing her collection of luxury items bought with my money threatened. I looked at the clock on the wall. The hands kept turning, and I really wanted to take a hot shower and sleep peacefully without parasites around me. "Well, the drama is over for tonight," I said firmly, cutting off Martha's intention to start a second speech. "I give you 10 minutes. Pack your suitcases with your personal things from the guest room. Remember, only personal things. Do not try to take anything of mine, much less the jar of cookies from the table." 10 minutes, shrieked Martha, hysterical. "You are kicking us out in the middle of the night? Where do you want us to sleep? What a hard heart you have, Emily." "Wow, weren't you the one who wanted to manage my salary? That means you are good at managing money. Surely you have plenty of savings for a hotel or at least to buy a tent," I replied with sarcasm. 10 minutes starting now. If you go over by a second, do not blame me if the security guard of the gated community acts. And you know that the guards here are very serious, especially if they find out there are guests causing a scene." Without waiting for their response, I turned around and went into my room, leaving behind 3 human beings who were now running around like headless chickens. The sound of hurried steps and Martha grumbling behind my back sounded like victory music to my ears. The commotion coming from the guest room sounded like a fight over sales items. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, supervising their movements like a site foreman. Martha seemed the busiest. Her hands grabbed clothes from the closet and threw them haphazardly into a huge travel bag I do not know where she had gotten. Rachel, on the other hand, was whining in a corner of the bed, hugging her jars of face creams as if she were being separated from the love of her life. Meanwhile, James, he just paced back and forth aimlessly, like a broken iron. He would pick up a shirt and put it back down, the living image of a man who has lost his way. Bad habits are hard to eradicate. Martha's hands seemed to have an uncontrollable itch to grab anything that shined. I saw with my own eyes how she tried to put my expensive silk scarf into her bag. "Hey, wait a moment, Martha," I reprimanded her calmly but firmly. "I bought that scarf at a craft fair. It is expensive. It is not included in carry-on luggage. Please take it out or I empty the bag right here." With a face red from shame and contained rage, Martha took out the delicate fabric and threw it back onto the bed. Her mouth mumbled a string of curses that, luckily, could not be heard clearly because of Rachel's increasingly loud sobs. James kept trying to play his last card as the aggrieved husband. He stopped pacing and looked at me with deliberately teary eyes, hoping my woman's heart would melt. "Honey, are you really capable of leaving my mother on the street? It is already night. It is cold," he said pitifully. I simply looked at the clock, ignoring his cheap drama. "The cold of the night is bad, James. But what is worse? That, or the mouth of someone who asks his wife to live on $50 a month while he lives the high life? Besides, you're a man, right? You should be the shield for your mother and your sister, not whining to the woman you have, religiously speaking, just divorced." Just when the long hand of the clock marked 12, the doorbell of the front gate rang, breaking the silence of the night. I smiled broadly. The cavalry had arrived right on time. I went to the entrance and opened the door to two security guards from the community, burly men, Miller and his partner. I had alerted them by text when I went into the room. "Good evening, Miss Emily. Is there a problem? You asked us to be on alert." Officer Miller asked politely, adjusting his cap. I pointed toward the living room where the three unwanted guests had just dragged their suitcases out of the room with unfriendly faces. "Please, help them leave, Miller. They are guests whose visiting time has run out, but they are having a little trouble leaving," I said, smiling kindly at Miller. James's face turned pale when he saw the blue uniforms. The little courage he had gathered to argue with me vanished instantly. Martha tried to shout a protest, accusing me of abandoning my elders, but Miller, firmly but without losing politeness, took Martha's large bag and carried it toward the gate. "Let's go, ladies, sir. It is not the plan to bother the neighbors at these hours. Please, continue your discussion outside," Miller said, with a tone that admitted no reply. The scene that followed was the most pathetic and at the same time most satisfying parade of my entire life in this house. Martha walked stumbling, grumbling nonstop. Rachel followed her, shuffling her feet with her head down, wearing flip-flops because she had broken a heel in the rush. And James went last with his head completely sunken. The cool guy airs were over, the mocking laughs were over. They looked like an amateur theater company whose stage had collapsed. I accompanied them to the gate, making sure they did not take a single stone from my garden in their pockets. As soon as they crossed the threshold, Miller closed the high iron gate with a clank that sounded like celestial music to my ears. James turned, grabbed the bars, and looked at me with desperation, perhaps hoping I would change my mind at the last second, like in romantic movies. Too bad for them this was a horror movie, and I was the director. "Good night, James. I hope you do well with your $50, I told him, waving a small goodbye with my hand. I turned off the porch light, leaving them in the darkness at the edge of the cold sidewalk, and entered my house, which now felt immense, fresh, and, most importantly, pest-free. Sleeping deeply without James's snoring, nor the sound of the TV keeping Martha up at full volume, turned out to be an incomparable earthly pleasure. However, just when I was about to close my eyes and travel to the dream world, my cell phone, which was on the nightstand, vibrated strongly. The screen lit up in the darkness of the room, showing a cascade of notifications from my banking app. It seemed there were 3 people in panic out there trying to assault my financial fortress. I picked up the phone, holding back laughter, imagining the comic scene that was unfolding at the ATM at the entrance of the gated community. My suspicions were confirmed. The notifications reported failed cash withdrawal attempts, 1, 2, up to 5 times in a minute. James must have been sweating bullets in front of the machine, typing the PIN with trembling fingers, hoping the ATM would misread the card or that, suddenly, it would spit out money out of pure pity. What a shame, James. The card you have is only a supplementary card. I have the main one, and the temporary block button. I pressed it while you were busy packing your suitcases. So you can argue with the machine until dawn. The money won't come out even if you cry blood. I could imagine Martha's face seeing the message on the screen. Transaction denied. Surely she was hitting the ATM with her purse, accusing it of being broken or conspiring with me. Rachel was probably biting her nails, realizing that tonight she would not sleep in a soft hotel bed like the ones they used to show off on social media. Karma is fast, faster than the food delivery service James used to order with my money. It was a great satisfaction to see those failure notifications, as if they were the scoreboard of a game where I had won by a landslide. Not content with the failure at the ATM, 10 minutes later, another notification arrived, this time from a 3-star hotel not far from our community. It seems they still had enough pride to try to stay in a decent place, even though the cash in James's wallet barely reached enough for 3 cheap sliders. The notification said the same thing. Transaction denied. The credit card James bragged about to his friends was now worth no more than a piece of plastic from a broken toy. I chuckled under the sheets, imagining the hotel receptionist looking at them with a mixture of pity and suspicion when the card did not work. The harsh reality must have been slapping them again and again. All this time they had lived in the clouds, forgetting to step on solid ground because I always provided them with a smooth landing strip in the form of money. Now that strip had disappeared and they were nosediving onto the asphalt of reality. James did not have a penny of savings because he always spent his meager salary on gambling. Rachel was a NEET with delusions of grandeur, and Martha only depended on the monthly allowance I gave her. The sum of the fortunes of these 3 human beings was probably less than that of a street musician on Fifth Avenue. The next morning, I woke up feeling incredibly fresh and renewed while savoring a hot tea on the porch. Miller, the security guard who had kicked them out the night before, passed in front of my house with a knowing smile. He stopped for a moment by the gate, clearly anxious to share his report. "Ms. Emily, your ex-husband and his family made quite a scene last night at the security booth," Miller informed me, laughing. "They wanted me to lend them money for a taxi. They said they had forgotten their wallet, but I told them it was the end of the month. In the end, they walked away grumbling. Then I saw them go into a sleazy motel in the alley behind the market." I almost spit out my tea hearing his story. The motel in the alley behind the market was famous for its humidity, its mattresses hard as ironing boards, and its mosquitoes the size of houseflies. I imagined Martha, with her sensitive skin, and Rachel, unable to sleep without air conditioning, huddled in a narrow room smelling of stale air. "Thanks for the information, Miller. You are a champion," I told him, sliding a tip into his hand as thanks for maintaining safety and my sanity. At noon, James called me. It was rare that he had credit. Maybe he had wheedled it out of his sister, or it was his last coins. I put the phone on speaker while I cut my nails. "How calm you are, right? You are incredibly cruel." James's voice sounded hoarse and desperate. The background noise was deafening, like horns and parking attendants shouting, "Why don't my cards work? My mother is sick. Rachel is dying of hunger. Do you want to kill us slowly?" "Wow, James, have you forgotten already?" I replied calmly, blowing on my nails. "Last night, you and your mother said she was going to handle my salary. Well, now I am learning to save, following her advice. My money is kept safe and sound. You said that $50 was enough for pads. Isn't that enough to feed 3 people who think they are so rich? Do the math again. Maybe your calculator is broken." Without waiting for an answer or more insults, I hung up. Let them enjoy the feeling of being completely independent without my subsidies. Welcome to the real world, my dears. Life is a wheel, yes, but it seems that the wheel of James's family had not only turned downwards, but had come loose and rolled to the bottom of a dark and stinking sewer. Rumors fly faster than a plane. That same afternoon, I received a report from an old friend who lives in a humble area on the outskirts. She told me she had seen a circus troupe, my ex-husband and his family, hauling their things to an overcrowded tenement in an alley so narrow that motorcycles had to lean to pass. Their new home was far from decent, let alone luxurious. Imagine a room of 10 by 10 feet to house 3 egos the size of Mount Everest. The walls were not concrete, but thin drywall that would probably get a hole with one punch. No more air conditioning blowing celestial breezes. Now they only had a small, rusty fan that made as much noise as a coconut grater. And that was if they remembered to pay the electricity. If not, enjoy a free sauna at all hours. I could imagine Martha's ordeal there. The woman who could not sleep if the sheets were not Egyptian cotton. Now she would have to spread a plastic mat on a cold and damp cement floor. The lavender or vanilla air fresheners she used to smell in my house would now be replaced by the stench of pipes, a mixture of wet trash and sewage. Perhaps Martha would consider this a divine test, when in reality it was just the logical consequence of having a mouth too big to insult the bread of others. Rachel would undoubtedly be the target of every mosquito in the area. Her skin, which she took care of with creams worth hundreds of dollars, paid for by me, of course. Now it would be a feast for blood-sucking insects. No more waking up with a radiant face. Now she would wake up with a face full of bites and dark circles from spending the night squashing mosquitoes. Rachel, who felt disgust for a speck of dust, would now have to make friends with the cockroaches that would probably visit the new and arrogant tenants often. The issue of food would be the next chapter of their torture. Before, they only had to point at a menu and the food appeared on the table. Sirloin steak, paella, pizza, whatever they wanted. Now, the money left in James's pocket probably only reached enough for instant noodles or a daily special with the cheapest main course, and that to be shared among three. I laughed, imagining them sitting in a circle on the floor, fighting for a piece of stale bread while blaming each other for their ruin when the answer was in their own reflection. In the midst of that suffering, James would become his mother's punching bag. Martha, unable to accept her new life, would complain all day, blaming James for being useless, for not having savings, and for not knowing how to trick his wife. James, with morale as fragile as a soggy cracker, could only hang his head. He could no longer escape to gamble or drink expensive coffees because his balance was zero. He was trapped in the prison he himself had built, with two incredibly whining jailers. While they enjoyed their new cardboard palace, I was busy doing a deep cleaning, not just of the dust, but of all the negative traces they had left. I hired a professional cleaning service to vacuum every last speck of dust from their old room, disinfect the environment, and renew the house. I put all the clothes James had left into large garbage bags, not to keep as a souvenir, but to donate. The house seemed twice as big and 10 times brighter. There was no longer that negative aura oppressing the chest. I sat on my comfortable sofa, drinking cold orange juice while looking at the garden. $50 for pads, I murmured with an ironic smile. That phrase now sounded like the most ridiculous joke in the world. Precisely with those $50, now they would have to learn advanced mathematics. How to divide that amount for food, rent, electricity, and water for 3 adults for a month. Good luck with the calculations, dear family. I hope your calculator doesn't explode. The midday sun beat down hard as if it had a personal grudge against anyone who dared to go out without protection. In my cool and comfortable house, I enjoyed an iced tea while watching the fish in the pond, feeling a peace I had lost a long time ago. However, the news, which for some reason always finds a direct path to my ears, brought me the story of the fate of the 3 individuals who had just been banished from my life. The story was so detailed that I could visualize the scene in my head as if I were watching a movie in high definition. On the other side of the city, in a dusty diner full of flies serving a cheap daily menu, a vital drama was entering its most painful act for James and his troupe. Let's imagine for a moment their state after several days as inhabitants of their cardboard palace. Rachel's face, usually flawless thanks to treatments worth thousands of dollars, now looked dull and greasy, like a poorly drained churro. Her hair, once perfect, was now limp and tangled because her expensive shampoo had run out and she had to replace it with a packet of supermarket shampoo that left hair like a scouring pad. Martha, don't even get me started. The woman who bragged about jewelry now looked like a witch who has lost her magic wand. Her designer dress was wrinkled, and her face had a permanent crease, as if she constantly smelled James's sweat. Hunger understands no pride. That is a law of nature that not even Martha could deny. After days eating only instant noodles that had twisted their guts, that noon they decided to look for real food. Of course, not in an air-conditioned restaurant where they used to take photos, but in a modest diner on the edge of a noisy highway. The place was narrow, hot, and the smell of fried food mixed with the smoke from exhaust pipes. For them, used to living like kings, entering that diner must have been like entering a torture chamber. James walked in front with a tired step, putting his hand in his pocket to count the crumpled and smelly bills. His face was gaunt, with dark circles from not sleeping, from spending the nights killing mosquitoes in his new hovel. Behind him, Martha complained about the heat, fanning herself with a piece of cardboard, while Rachel walked on tiptoes so as not to step in a puddle of dirty water in front of the bar, an image that contrasted brutally with their style a week ago when they still lived at my expense. They sat on a long, chipped wooden bench, squeezed together with laborers and truck drivers on their lunch break. Rachel looked with disgust at the sticky table and the flies feasting on a ketchup stain. She took a napkin and wiped the table repeatedly with a face like she was about to vomit. A napkin she had to ask the owner for because she didn't even have money for tissues. Martha ordered the food in a low voice, afraid someone would recognize her. Half a portion of rice, a little ratatouille, and just the broth of the stew. No meat, she ordered in a whisper. A truly pathetic order for an ex-socialite from a gated community. While they tried to swallow that food that must have tasted like sand mixed with tears of regret, the customer's attention shifted to an old television on top of a drink cooler. It was an old model, with colors that sometimes turned purple and sound with static, but it could still be seen. The program was a very popular business talk show, hosted by a famous bald man with sunglasses. The title of the program appeared on the screen, Success Stories, From Nothing to Business Queens. At first, James and his family didn't care. They were too busy lamenting their luck and counting the change. But then, the deep and authoritative voice of the host mentioned a name that sounded very familiar to them. Martha, who was chewing the ratatouille, choked. Her eyes popped out of their sockets, staring at the screen as if she saw a ghost in broad daylight. Rachel dropped the piece of bread she had just bitten. Her mouth opened so wide that a fly could have entered and laid eggs if she hadn't been careful. On the blurry screen of the television, I appeared. Yes, the Emily they knew as a submissive wife. The Emily they had humiliated. The Emily they valued at $50. But the Emily on the screen was different. She wore an elegant designer blazer, fresh and professional makeup, and a confident smile that radiated success. The Emily in a bathrobe at home no longer existed. Now there was Emily, the great businesswoman. "Good afternoon, thanks for inviting me," I said on television with a calm and sure voice. The host peppered me with questions about my business. And that was when the atomic bomb of truth began to explode, destroying the last vestiges of sanity of James's family. "Ms. Emily, many people don't know that you are the sole owner, not just the manager. Why have you preferred to keep a low profile until now?" asked the host. I, on television, smiled wisely. I believe that the more you have, the more humble you should be. Besides, I wanted to see who my real friends were, without money influencing things. And yes, I kept my assets secret, even from those closest to me, to avoid unwanted situations. I replied diplomatically. An answer that was, in reality, a very direct hint for the parasites who were now staring at me, open-mouthed from a roadside diner. Martha gripped the edge of the wooden table tightly. Her nails turned white and her ears burned hearing the words, assets, and sole owner. Her brain, usually slow for studies, suddenly became as fast as a merchant's calculator. 50 locations, sole owner, millions of dollars. All those figures spun around in her head, causing her terrible dizziness. She had just realized that she had not been extorting a simple restaurant manager, but a tycoon of the restaurant industry, and she had only asked her for $50. How stupid! What a huge loss! James looked at the screen with a lost gaze, as if his soul had just been ripped out. He remembered how he belittled me, how he ordered me to make him coffee, to wash his dirty clothes, how he demanded I save. And meanwhile, the wife he treated like a servant was a boss with thousands of employees. His pride as a man, already fragile, shattered. He felt like the stupidest man in the world. A wife so rich, so successful, and he had despised her for gambling and obeying his greedy mother. If he had been a little kinder, he could now be sitting in a director's office, not on a wooden chair with gum stuck to it. Rachel was the one who reacted most hysterically. She jumped up, pointing at the screen with a trembling finger. "That one. That is my sister-in-law. It is Emily. Look, Mom, it is Emily. She has a ton of restaurants. She is a millionaire," she shouted with a voice so high-pitched that all the customers in the diner turned around, surprised. "Mom, look, Mom, it is Emily." The people in the bar looked at Rachel strangely. They saw her disheveled appearance, messy hair, and greasy face, and they compared it with the elegant and distinguished woman on the television. No one believed her. "Girls, if you are going to trip out, don't do it at noon. It brings bad luck," commented a taxi driver while sipping his coffee. "How is a woman that rich going to have poor family? Go on, finish your rice before it gets cold." "It is true, sir. I am not lying. She's my brother's wife," Rachel insisted, shaking James, who remained paralyzed. "James, say something. Tell them she is your wife." But James could not speak. He had his tongue glued to the roof of his mouth. What was he going to brag about? Being the husband of the woman he had just divorced and kicked out of the house? Being the husband of the woman he valued at the price of some pads? Admitting it would only make him look even more pathetic. On television, the interview continued. The host asked me what had been the biggest challenge of my life. "The biggest challenge did not come from the business," I replied on screen, looking directly at the camera as if I were looking into James's eyes. "The biggest challenge is dealing with close people who do not know how to be grateful, those to whom you give a hand and they take your arm. But I give thanks, because now that burden has disappeared. I feel lighter, freer to create." That phrase slapped all three of them harder than any physical blow. Martha felt like she was running out of air. The life of luxury she had always dreamed of had been within her reach. She had had it, and she herself had thrown it in the trash. She imagined the designer bags, the diamond jewelry, the vacations abroad, all the luxuries she could have enjoyed as the mother-in-law of a successful businesswoman. Everything had vanished, annihilated by her uncontrollable greed. Tears of regret began to roll down Martha's wrinkled cheeks, wetting her ragged dress. They were not tears for having lost a good daughter-in-law, but for having lost access to a walking ATM. "Emily, Emily," she moaned quietly with a broken voice. "Why didn't you say it before? Why did you stay quiet?" Martha began to delirious, blaming the circumstances, blaming me for not bragging. What strange people. Even when they are wrong, they look for a scapegoat. James hung his head, hiding his face in his hands. He was ashamed of himself, of the customers in the diner, and of reality. He remembered his arrogance when smiling mockingly when his mother asked for my salary. He remembered his smugness when I handed him the brown envelope. It turned out the envelope not only contained a divorce petition, but also his termination letter from a comfortable life. He had just been fired from his status as a millionaire husband. Rachel sat back down without strength. Her energy had run out after shouting in vain. She looked with desolation at the remains of rice on her plate. The food, which before seemed passable to her, now tasted like dirt. She looked at the screen again and saw the handbag I had next to me. It was a limited edition that cost the same as a new car. She, who used to beg me to buy her knockoffs at the flea market, when her sister-in-law could have bought her the entire factory, if she had been a little more polite. "We are fools, absolute fools," she whispered to herself. The burly owner of the bar approached their table with an unfriendly face. "Hey, are you going to stay there staring at the TV like idiots? Are you going to eat the rice or just look at it? If you have finished, "Pay up. There are people waiting." That abrupt reprimand returned them to the cruel, real world, a world where they were nobody, a world where they had to count coins to pay for a meal they hadn't even finished. With a trembling hand, James took out the last bill from his wallet and handed it to the owner with a broken heart. As they left the bar, their steps were heavy, as if they wore shackles on their ankles. Behind them, the applause of the audience in the TV studio resonated, celebrating my success. That sound accompanied them, becoming the most tragic soundtrack for a regret that arrived too late. The sun stung more and more, but their hearts were frozen by the bitter reality that they had just thrown away a diamond to pick up trash. The scent of flowers filled every corner of the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel I had rented for that day. It was a big day, the day I inaugurated the headquarters and flagship restaurant of my chain. Important guests had begun to arrive, business partners, local authorities, and journalists from various media outlets. Everything was glitter, elegance, and polite laughter. However, behind my kind smile when greeting the guests, a radar in my head remained on, alert to the arrival of some uninvited special guests who would undoubtedly dare to come. My instinct never failed, especially after Miller, the security guard of my gated community and now loyal informant, told me that morning he had seen my ex-husband's entourage getting on a bus with a deliberately pitiful appearance. It seems that, after seeing me on television the day before, instead of rethinking and repenting, Martha's twisted brain had started working at double speed. For people like Martha, shame is secondary. The first thing is money. Surely she thought a rich person like me had a fatal weakness, the fear of staining my reputation, and that was where she planned to attack me. Let's go back a bit in time to see what happened that morning in that tenement apartment. According to Martha's rusty logic, the only way to get money out of me was through public emotional blackmail. The plan was meticulously traced on a hole-ridden plastic mat. "Listen to me well," Martha said while massaging her sore feet. "Emily is now an important person. Surely she is terrified that journalists will find out she has an abandoned mother-in-law. We will go there and make a scene. I will fake a faint. You cry loudly. The key is to shame her until she gives us a blank check to shut us up." A brilliant plan in its stupidity. They forgot a crucial detail. I was no longer the Emily of before, the one who could be scared with threats of sin or what people will say. But of course, they did not know that. They were busy preparing their wardrobe. Rachel, who usually did not leave the house without perfectly outlined eyebrows, today had left her hair uncombed to look disheveled. She had even put on talcum powder carelessly to look pale, as if she were malnourished, although lately she really was. James, the aimless ex-husband, was forced to wear an old faded shirt with a rip in the armpit. The pants were too short, showing his thin ankles, an outfit perfect for backing the narrative of the husband aggrieved by a cruel wife. Martha herself chose the raggediest dress she had, with 2 buttons torn off, and deliberately, she did not put on decent footwear, only some thin flip-flops of an undefined color between blue and black from dirt. "Remember the instructions?" Martha said with fervor. "No one smiles. Long face and watery eyes. If necessary, James, put a little Vicks Vaporub under your eyes so it looks like you cried all night." James nodded, resigned. He no longer had the strength to oppose. Hunger dominated his judgment. In his mind, if the plan worked, today he could eat beef stew until he was full, instead of rice with tomato sauce. Their trip to the hotel was quite an odyssey. They had to make 3 transfers by bus, squeezed between passengers carrying chickens and vegetables from the market. The smell of their bodies, since they had gone days without showering out of laziness to wait in line at the communal bathroom, mixed with the sweat and dust of the street. Rachel was about to vomit several times, but Martha encouraged her with the promise of the millions that, according to her, they were about to get. Upon arriving in front of the hotel, the magnificence of the building almost intimidated them. The huge chandelier in the lobby looked intimidating to someone who only carried coins in their pocket. Luxury cars dropped off impeccably dressed guests. The security guards at the entrance, in uniforms more expensive than the sum of the dignity of the three of them, stood firm, but hunger and greed are a powerful fuel. Martha took a deep breath, put on her most miserable face, and signaled her children. "Let's go. The show starts," she whispered. They headed to the main entrance. Of course, they hadn't taken 5 steps when 2 security guards blocked their path. It was logical. Their appearance was more that of lost beggars than guests. "Excuse me, folks. Begging is prohibited in the hotel," said one of the guards firmly. "Please leave the premises before we call the police." This was the moment Martha was waiting for. Instead of leaving, she let herself fall onto the marble floor. Thud! The sound was quite loud. "Help! Help!" shouted Martha with a shrill voice, breaking the calm of the lobby. "I am not a beggar. I am the mother-in-law of the hostess of this event." "Emily! Emily, daughter-in-law, come out! How cruel you are letting them throw your mother out like a dog." Her acting was masterful. If there were an Oscar for the queen of street drama, Martha would take it. Rachel knelt beside her, hugging her and crying at the top of her lungs. "Mom, be patient, Mom. Emily has changed a lot. She has already forgotten about us," she sobbed, her crocodile tears flowing thanks to the Vicks Vapo Rub. James stayed behind with a pitiful face, wringing his hands like the most helpless husband in the world. "Excuse me, gentlemen. We only want to see my wife." "I miss her," he told the confused guard. The commotion attracted the attention of everyone in the lobby. Arriving guests stopped, whispering and pointing. Cell phones started appearing, recording the scene. This was what Martha wanted, to go viral. She was sure that the more recordings there were, the more cornered I would be. In her head, she already imagined me running out, kneeling at her feet, begging for forgiveness, and offering her a briefcase full of money to shut her up. Inside the ballroom, my personal assistant, Laura, approached me with a panicked face. "Miss Emily, there is a scandal at the entrance. Your ex-husband's family has come. They are shouting and throwing themselves on the floor. Security wants to throw them out, but journalists are getting closer. What do we do?" I smiled slightly. I had foreseen it. If I threw them out by force, the narrative of the arrogant, rich woman oppressing the poor would be created. The media loves those stories. And Martha knew that weak point. But Martha forgot she was playing chess with the one moving all the pieces. "Don't throw them out, Laura," I replied calmly. "Let them in." Laura looked at me open-mouthed. "In, ma'am, but they smell bad and will make us look ridiculous. They are going to ruin the event. Trust me, if we don't solve it now, they will remain a problem forever. Let them in, take them to the main stage, and tell security to treat them like VIP guests who have arrived late," I ordered firmly. Laura nodded, hesitant, and she ran toward the entrance. I looked again at the imposing stage with its big screen behind it. In principle, it was supposed to project a corporate video, but it seemed I would have to change the content. I signaled the technician. "Prepare the backup file I gave you this morning. Wait for my signal," I told him through the small microphone on my lapel. The technician gave me a thumbs up. Back in the lobby, Martha continued her show. "Emily, come out. Don't hide behind your money. Remember the sin, Emily." Her shouts were getting louder, feeling emboldened seeing she was being recorded. Some high society ladies who did not know the story began to look at her with pity. "Poor thing, what a heartless woman," whispered one of them. Hearing it, Martha's spirit ignited even more. She felt she had won public opinion. Suddenly, Laura appeared in the crowd, and with a forced smile, she addressed Martha. "Excuse me, are you Miss Emily's mother-in-law? Please, come in. Miss Emily is waiting for you inside. She's very eager to see you." Hearing that, Martha's crying stopped dead. She looked at Rachel and James, her eyes shining with victory. "See? What did I tell you?" Martha whispered to her children while Laura helped her up. "She is afraid. She is afraid we will embarrass her more. Soon we will be swimming in money." The 3 entered following Laura with their chins held high, as if they were the owners of the place. although their body odor made some guests cover their noses as they passed. James tried to fix his hair with a little saliva, hoping to look more presentable. Rachel looked with disdain at the well-dressed guests, thinking, "Wait and see. Tomorrow I will wear a dress more expensive than yours." When the door to the main hall opened, the cool air of the air conditioning and the delicious aroma of food welcomed them. Martha's eyes went wide as plates at the interior luxury. James's stomach roared without shame. They crossed the crowd of guests who now looked at them in silence. I was standing on the stage, holding a microphone, observing their arrival with an indecipherable smile. They walked toward me with overflowing confidence. Martha even waved to the journalists, who immediately focused their cameras on them. She believed it was her red carpet. Upon arriving in front of the stage, Martha let go of Laura and resumed her drama. She pointed at me. "Emily, finally you dare to show your face. Look at us, look at your mother. We are dying of hunger. They have thrown us into the street while you have a feast. Where is your conscience?" Her voice resonated through the speakers. The journalists pounced. Camera flashes blinked incessantly. James took the opportunity to shout, "Emily, do you still dare to call yourself a wife? You let your husband sleep on the floor while you enjoy luxury hotels. You are a sinner." Rachel was not left behind. "Give us back what is ours. You have kept all of James's fortune." The atmosphere heated up. Guests whispered. My reputation was at stake, but I did not flinch. I let them vomit all their bile. The more they spoke, the deeper they dug their own grave. "Are you finished?" I asked through the microphone with a soft but firm voice that silenced the room. "Thank you for coming from so far away. Your performance has been magnificent. I appreciate the effort." Martha snorted. "Cut the crap. We don't need your fake kindness. We want justice. We demand compensation, or we will not move from here and will keep shouting until the whole world knows how cruel you are," she threatened. "Compensation, huh?" I nodded, as if considering an offer. "Okay. Since you have asked for everyone's attention, how about we first see your merits as my family, so that it is fair, and everyone present here knows what kind of justice you claim." Without waiting for an answer, I raised my right hand, giving the signal to the light and screen technician. "Please play the video, volume to the max." The lights in the hall dimmed. All eyes turned to the giant screen behind me, which began to light up. They didn't realize yet that what was going to be projected was not a boring corporate video, but a short documentary film titled Greed. The smile of victory on Martha's face still lingered before freezing into an expression of horror she would never forget. The final act had just begun, and this time there would be no mercy. The giant screen behind me, which normally showed sales charts or photos of dishes, turned into the most captivating cinema in history. The projector light illuminated the room, showing an image of amazing clarity. I have never skimped on quality, and that includes the security cameras I installed in every corner of my old house. The original intention was security against burglars, but they turned out to be more useful for recording the misdeeds of the parasites sleeping in the guest room. At the first second of playback, the murmur of the room ceased, giving way to a sepulchral silence. All eyes were glued to the screen. The opening scene showed the living room of my house, with the date and time clearly visible. There appeared the figure of Martha, sneaking into my bedroom while I was showering. With surprising agility for someone who always complained about her back, her wrinkled hands opened my wallet, took out several purple bills, and hid them in her bra with a malicious smile. A collective gasp ran through the room. The ladies who previously felt pity for Martha now covered their mouths, looking with disgust at the woman who remained paralyzed in front of the stage. Martha's face, previously red with anger, was now ashen gray. She wanted to scream, deny, but her tongue was paralyzed by the irrefutable evidence. Without giving anyone time to breathe, the video changed scenes. Now the star was Rachel. She was seen in the laundry room holding one of my favorite silk dresses. Instead of washing it, she cut the armpits with scissors while laughing alone. So that stingy woman learns. Let's see if she goes to the office with a torn dress, she was heard saying clearly. Boos began to be heard from the back. What a shameless sister-in-law! On top of living for free, she goes and destroys her clothes, shouted a guest. Rachel trembled, trying to hide her face with her matted hair. But it was too late. Everyone had seen her true face. The final act was the definitive firecracker. The video jumped to the night of the expulsion. The audio was crisp, capturing every nuance of their arrogance. Martha's now legendary voice was heard. "Give me your paycheck. I will manage it. For you, $50 for pads is plenty." Her voice resonated throughout the hall, followed by the cruel and contemptuous laughter of the three. Silence. But this time, it was a silence of horror. The guests, polite people with principles, felt nauseous witnessing such behavior. $50, I said into the microphone, breaking the silence. That is the price you put on my labor. And now you come here, rolling on the floor, demanding a fortune that does not belong to you, shouting that I am the bad one. I shook my head. You are not the victims. You are the executioners reaping what you have sown. Suddenly, Martha screamed hysterically. It is a lie! It is a setup! The video is edited! She is a liar! But no one believed her. The expression of panic on their faces during the projection was the most compelling proof. The journalists who were previously ready to defend the oppressed family now turned against them. Camera flashes riddled Martha's face, blinding her and plunging her into even greater panic. Incisive questions began to rain down. "Ma'am, is it true you stole from your daughter-in-law?" "James, why did you laugh while they humiliated your wife?" "Rachel, why did you destroy your sister-in-law's dress?" James tried to flee, pulling his mother and sister, but they were surrounded by a crowd judging them with their eyes. Cold sweat ran down his forehead. He looked at me with pleading eyes. "Emily, please tell them it is a misunderstanding," he whispered. "A misunderstanding?" I laughed. "James, stealing is not a misunderstanding. It is a crime. Forging a signature for a loan is also not a misunderstanding. It is a felony." Just after saying that, 4 uniformed police officers entered the room, accompanied by my lawyer. James's face turned white as paper. His knees trembled. The police stopped in front of him. "Good afternoon. Are you James Price?" asked an officer. James could only nod weakly. "We have received a complaint for alleged forgery of documents and fraud in online loans using Ms. Emily's identity without her permission, in addition to misappropriation of family funds. We also have evidence of theft by Ms. Martha and property damage by Ms. Rachel," continued the officer, showing an arrest warrant. The world collapsed on Martha's head. She dreamed of leaving with a briefcase of money, and now they were taking her away in a patrol car. "I haven't done anything. It was my son," she shouted, trying to sacrifice her own son to save herself. James looked at her with disbelief. The mother he had defended tooth and nail was now abandoning him. "You will also have to accompany us to the station as the alleged perpetrator of a theft crime," said the officer coldly. An officer approached Martha to detain her. Rachel collapsed on the floor, crying and pleading. "Please don't take me to jail. I am young. I only made a rip in a dress." The scene was both pathetic and rewarding. The 3 people who previously walked arrogantly through my house were now dragged like criminals before hundreds of witnesses. Their honor had been stripped naked and skinned by their own actions. The guests applauded while the police took them away, as if witnessing the end of a play with detestable villains. I saw James's hunched back as they took him away, the back of the man I once loved and who became my greatest source of pain. I felt a slight tightness in my chest, not of nostalgia, but of pity, seeing how low a human being can fall by not controlling their greed. Just before the door closed, Martha turned and looked at me with hate and desperation. But suddenly her body tensed, her eyes rolled back, and her mouth twisted. She collapsed into the officer's arms. "My partner! She is fainting! No, she is seizing!" shouted the policewoman. Panic seized the entrance. Martha was suffering a stroke. Her body had not been able to withstand the shock. From the stage, I sighed. Karma has curious ways of acting. I signaled Laura to turn off the screen and turn the lights back on. "Excuse the interruption, ladies and gentlemen," I said calmly. "Let's continue with lunch." For me, the show was over. What remained was the legal process and a bleak future for those who did not know how to be grateful. Time passed, relentless. 3 years since that shameful incident at the hotel. Today, a fine drizzle wet the streets of the city. I was sitting in the back seat of my car, smiling, while my husband, Mark, read a story to our 2-year-old daughter. He was not a millionaire businessman, just a humble architecture professor, but his heart was immense, and he knew how to value a woman. The car passed through a slum. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a scene that shrank my heart. In front of a filthy bar, a thin and gaunt woman was scrubbing a pile of dirty dishes next to a sewer. Her face looked much older than she was. It was Rachel, the one who previously bragged about fake handbags, now a dishwasher for hire. The owner of the bar, a burly woman, shouted at her, pointing to a spot. Rachel just hung her head. Where was the arrogant Rachel, buried under a mountain of dirty dishes and harsh reality? I knew her daily wage was not for makeup, but for adult diapers and cheap medicine for her mother. Yes, Martha was still alive, but in conditions worse than death. The stroke left her hemiplegic. She lay on a thin mattress in her overcrowded apartment, staring at a ceiling full of damp spots. Her mouth, once a sharp weapon, was now twisted, and she could barely speak. The only person who took care of her was Rachel, the daughter she had taught to be arrogant and capricious. Now Rachel had to bathe her, change her diapers, and feed her puree. I was told that Martha cried often at night, perhaps regretful, perhaps yearning for the comfortable life of my house. But regret does not rewind time. Her favorite son, her hope, was now in prison. James was sentenced to 3 years for forgery and fraud. In prison, they said, he had become the target of other prisoners because of his weak character. The former little gentleman now had to give massages to the block boss in exchange for a cigarette or a little more food. His body was skin and bones, his skin dark and his gaze empty. A year ago, I received a letter from him, full of pleas and promises of love. He said he had changed and begged me to visit him. "I miss your food, honey," he wrote. I read it and burned it. Did he miss my food? How funny. Before he threw it away because it lacked salt. Now let him enjoy his nostalgia with prison grub. "Honey, what are you looking at?" asked Mark, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Nothing, love, just the past, which is already far behind in the rearview mirror." Mark nodded. The rearview mirror is for looking occasionally and being careful, but if you keep staring at it, you crash. We laughed, a happy and sincere laugh. The car moved forward, leaving behind Rachel, struggling with soap and grease. I no longer felt resentment, but I wasn't going to get down to help her either. I had already taught them the most valuable lesson: independence. Let them learn to earn a living and value what it costs to earn those $50 they laughed about so much. Karma is curious. It needs no address or zip code and never mistakes the recipient. For Martha, James, and Rachel, karma was no longer an abstract concept, but their bedfellow every night, reminding them that every action has a price and the bill is paid, in cash or in installments for life. Upon arriving home, the aroma of the new housekeeper's food welcomed me. My home was now full of life. There was no longer a demanding mother-in-law, nor a lazy husband, nor an envious sister-in-law. Only my daughter's laughter and conversations with Mark about our next vacation. I sat on the sofa remembering Martha's phrase, $50 for pads. Before it hurt me, now it seemed like a historical joke. With what I earn in a minute in one of my restaurants, I could buy all the pads in a supermarket. But the important thing was not the money, but the dignity I managed to save. I picked up my cell phone, opened the banking app, and made my routine monthly transfer. Not to Martha's account, of course, but to the orphanage where my money is actually useful. Life goes on. Those left in the past can observe from a distance how the tree they tried to cut down is now taller, leafier, and bears sweet fruit. Fruit they will no longer be able to taste.